Beautiful gospel today. And this is that gospel that's given to us so we're still in the Easter season. This gospel kind of brings us right back to Holy Thursday. It takes place right after the Last Supper. Jesus is preparing for his crucifixion, his suffering, death, and crucifixion, eventually rising. And Jesus, it's very clear the warmth that he feels in his heart for his disciples. And he wants to leave them with something. And so he gives them a commandment. But it's important for us to hear this commandment as a precious gift that he's giving to them. He's saying, I give you a new commandment, that you would love one another. And I hope that as all of us hear that commandment, we recognize, well, Jesus, it's not really that new. Moses and all those who came before gave us the same word. Love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, and all your strength. And as summed up in all the rest of the law, and love your neighbor as yourself. But the new part of this commandment is the line that comes right afterward, right? It's the part where Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. And that's the commandment that takes us right way, way beyond all of the laws that had gone before. And it's more than just a commandment. It's also an invitation into his own life. Because it's very clear when Jesus speaks that he's not just saying, love as I have loved, but allow me to love through you. It's clear as it comes out in other parts of the gospel. So I think today part of what we're invited to do is to gaze upon the love of Christ. What does that mean? What's it look like? How are we invited to love like him? Of course, saints and so many others who have gone before us have always pointed to the crucifix or to Jesus upon the cross as the ultimate revelation of how he has loved us, with his arms outstretched, blood pouring from him holding nothing back, despite all of those who thought he was just a waste, but him desiring that nothing would be held back for his people. That's his commandment to us, that we would hold nothing back, both for him, but also for each other, as we look upon one another, to give everything. That's love. Anybody here think that's kind of difficult? A little bit? As I think of that, that's kind of impossible. I remember I was praying once and I was praying over the gospel, you must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And I got so angry at Jesus because that's impossible. How is that even possible? We have to remember that this gospel also took place in the context of the Last Supper, where there Jesus revealed another way that he loved his disciples. He loved his disciples in a myriad of ways, and he invites us into all of those ways. But here he washed his disciples' feet, and he went before them. And that's a powerful scene. It's important for us to remember what that scene would have looked like. Because there he got down on his knees. He wasn't like me, standing up, talking down to all of you. But he got down on his knees and began to look up at each of his disciples. And it was hard for his disciples to receive that kind of Jesus. A God who was beneath them. A God who wanted to approach from below, from a deep way of humility. And remember that Peter had a really hard time with it. He said, will you wash my feet? You will never wash my feet. And Jesus said to him, unless I wash your feet, you cannot be saved. And a part of that washing of his feet meant that Jesus would have to bow down low before him, to come humbly before him. It's also important for us to remember that that event took place at the Last Supper. And that's significant for us because every time we come to the Eucharist, we are celebrating the Last Supper. We're recalling it, living it again. Every time we come here, it's like we're living this very gospel, that Jesus is coming to us on his knees, bowing low before us, to those places within us that we find are the lowest. It might be important just to recall what some of those places are for us, because that's the place that Jesus wants to come to us tonight. Those areas of sin that have caused shame in our life, the places where we have a hard time looking at, or when we do look at, it causes us a lot of pain. Or maybe they're just areas of weakness, perhaps areas of our memory where we would prefer not to go back to. Jesus goes very humbly there, bows down before it, doesn't stand over, looking down upon us, but comes to us from below and looks up, only desiring that he might touch it, that he might wash it, so that it might be made clean. Maybe there's an area of physical limitation, physical weakness. I was in a parish this weekend and see many elderly that come. But all of us have some sort of weakness, just being limited human beings. The Lord chose to take on our flesh and bows very humbly before that, desiring that he might touch it. Perhaps there's areas in our life that have been deeply hurt by just the sin of comparison. As we look at what others have, we forget what has been given to us, and there's a wound that's been created. Maybe the Lord wants to draw very near there. There are many places in our lives that the Lord can draw very close to. And every time we come to the Eucharist, he wants to draw close to those places in our life. He comes to us in such a humble way in the Eucharist. I think so often as we gaze upon the Eucharist, we try to figure out how is it that such a great God is present in such a little way. But we're also invited simply to see that God has made himself so little. And we allow ourselves to receive himself in that humility tonight. And as we receive that, that's where we also receive the other gift of his commandment more deeply. And as he gives us his love in that humble way, we are also invited to imitate him, to bow down low. And when we see someone else who comes to us that we recognize immediately, this is a humble person. This person is slowing me down. He's getting in my way. She is making me impatient. Or he's coming at me with something. As we receive the humility of Christ, we can begin to recognize him more clearly in the other person. And we can recognize him in ourselves, in a deepening readiness to bow even lower than the humble person who comes before us. Tonight we're being given this incredible gift of the Eucharist, as we are every Sunday. We ask that our hearts would be made more open so we could recognize him here at the Eucharist and in all those whom we encounter.